everyone. You get me for the rest of the day. So, our next discussion is a panel discussion from trade gateways to strategic logistics platforms. It's my pleasure to introduce Derek Chow. He's Business Development Manager with Burns McDonnell. Prior to joining Burns McDonnell in 2022, Derek served as the Director of Hawaii's Commercial Ports and oversaw the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers water resource development throughout the Pacific. Derek?
Thank you. I'd like to call up my panel members, Patrick, Lee, Michelle. So as they're gathering here, let me kind of give a little bit of history. In the January Winter Conference, APP Winter Conference, we held a discussion on Golden Dome, and it came about because the Department of War was announcing Golden Dome systems for Hawaii and Alaska. And so we wanted to talk amongst the industry to see that the industry and the military were coordinating and were ready to support whatever it is. Unfortunately, a lot of it is still in the classified environment, so there's very little information on the unclassified. So this briefing is going to be unclassified like it was in Honolulu, but we did learn that there needs to be a great amount more of coordination and collaboration between the port industry as well as with the military. And so that's kind of the discussion that took place. We did have panel members from Matson, Pasha, and of course, Burns & McDonnell, the company I work for. We have a contract with MDA, so our project manager was able to share a little bit about what he knew about what kind of systems and the support infrastructure were going to be required and how that translates into the need for support from the logistics supply system. So that discussion turned out to be very interesting and interested by the group here, and so we want to continue the conversation. I met with the group here that's going to talk today, and the situation here in Guam and the Pacific Islands is a lot different than it is in Hawaii. In Hawaii, it's a landlord port where the terminal operators actually lease land from the port. Here, Guam Port operates the entire port. So the shipping and the movement of cargo containers are done by private companies, but on the port itself, it's all being done by the Port Authority. So that's a distinction that I learned in meeting with them. But there's still a great need for greater coordination and collaboration amongst the Port Authority, the private companies that provide the services, and the military. So we think that this conversation is still very valuable. So let me first introduce the panel members before we open it up to talk about the information that they have to share. So on the very far left, there's Lee Cabrera. He's the president of the Association of Terminal Operators, Stevedoring and Shipping Companies of Micronesia, and general manager of Saipan Stevedore Company. He helps lead efforts to strengthen and modernize the maritime supply chain connecting Guam, the CNMI, Palau, and other Micronesian ports. Immediately to my left is Michelle Quidachay. Sorry, I was practicing that earlier. Anyway, so Michelle is the general manager of APL for Guam and Saipan. She's the first local woman to lead the Guam operations. She has more than 25 years of experience in logistics, transportation, finance, and business development. And she's recognized in the industry for her leadership and active involvement in organizations that support Guam's businesses and maritime sectors. And in the middle, I have Patrick Bulaon. He's the vice president and general manager for Guam, Micronesia for Matson Navigation. Patrick oversees Matson sales and operations across Guam, the CNMI, Palau, FSM, RMI, and Okinawa. He joined Matson in 2021 after more than 28 years of service in operations, sales, leadership with ExxonMobil and Pacific Care Asia Pacific throughout Guam, Micronesia, and East Asia. So welcome and thank you for being on the panel. So as I was mentioning when we met, the discussion in Honolulu had a lot to do with Golden Dome, but the situation here in Guam is very different, both in terms of what the military is doing, but also how the logistics supply chain operates here. So let me start off by going to lead and maybe talk a little bit about, how you and your organization is involved in the logistics system, what kinds of things that you have ongoing that are future plans, and then maybe, talk a lot about resiliency here, maybe touch on some resiliency and maybe cybersecurity initiatives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Derek. So I represent Saipan Stevedore on the island Saipan. We also have a subsidiary company in which we operate as a stevedore company in Tinian. As it relates to the topic of, let's say, for example, the military agents, the carriers, such as Patrick, who represents Matson, and Michelle, their staff, would reach out to us in Saipan. We have military cargo coming our way. When I say military cargo, primarily cargo for field exercises, not necessarily permanent, not support cargo, cargo that supports military for the long term, but primarily exercises. Similarly in Tinian. So with that said, we don't have gantries unlike Guam. We have a lattice crane in Saipan. We have a hydraulic crane in Tinian. So when we talk about cargo, we greatly appreciate the agents for both APL and Matson that actually reach out to us. Oh, we have this cargo, dimensions, weights, especially if they're out of gauge. There's obviously, for our isolated islands, we need to prepare to service all the cargo needs. So with that said, we've made some recent investments for both Saipan, Tinian. We've acquired some cranes, new cranes, not gantry, but to service those needs. We also engage with the military, are the direct customer. So, for example, Patrick's staff reach out to us, their agents, and then, oh, by the way, who's handling the cargo? This is Red Horse going to Tinian. So we have pavers, we have articulated trucks. Articulated trucks for us are a bit heavier. So we have to arrange in advance, oh, that has to go on a vessel that's ro-ro capable, roll on, roll off. So those are the arrangements, the communications, the collaborations with the owners, the carriers, that has to occur before we can service, for example, the needs of the military. As I think was mentioned earlier by the Admiral, Red Horse, the construction arm of, I believe, of the Air Force, has the responsibility of laying asphalt for the 4 World War II airfields in northern Tinian. I can speak to some of it, that we've actually received some inquiries about supplies that are going to Tinian. The volumes of, for example, aggregates, for example. And this is something new to little old Tinian and little old us in Tinian. So we're making progress, and that's what I appreciate about this supplier, this contractor. Reaching out to us in advance, sharing with us the methods of discharge so we can actually work with them. Okay, I don't want to take too much time, but that's one example in how we actually support the military. We've also have civilian cargo, of course, but similarly, that's how we would deal with it. So open collaboration, communications, dialogue with the agents, the carriers, the contractors is very, very key. Okay.
And this is throughout Micronesia, all the way down.
Wow. For some of Micronesia that I've spoken to, for example, well, we don't have anyone from Palau here, but we actually saw it on a visit last year about some work that was being done in Angar. We did ask, so there was the use of some smaller barges that were used to move equipment. But even that would be, very, they know their place. Obviously, that's all shallow, not necessarily shallow water, but there's reefs involved. So I believe it requires some coordination as to, time of day, tides that are, that's what I understand in conversing with them. We don't have anyone here from YAP, But obviously, through news reports, we've received that the Yap runway, the runway in Yap is due for some improvements. We discussed that yesterday. You did some work on that, and you've seen the port footprint, volumes of cargo, the type of equipment needed. Those have to be discussed beforehand for better support and logistical efficiencies.
So while there's potential challenges, it sounds like, the communication, the relationships that you have are all ways that you come to solving any of the issues that might come about.
Yes, with a lot of communication, reaching out, trying to find out, like carriers, contractors, the carriers themselves, like I said, the type of cargo. And as an operator, we obviously reach out and search out how to best cope with that type of cargo.
Thank you.
And so there'll be some investments required. So be nice to your bosses and then, approach them and says, boss, we need to make this investment as a private company. Okay?
Would you elaborate on what some of those investments might be?
Like I mentioned, the cranes, we also have some top lifters. We have one of our sponsors, LMS. That's actually, we're reaching out to them for support. We just recently made an acquisition of a Taylor top pick. And I met with Mr. Beneventi earlier this morning. So, that's you need to make those connections and network, make it happen. So when we need support.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, would you like to continue and talk a little bit about how APL is handling the logistical systems and challenges?
Are we doing the slides or?
Hello? Can you put up Michelle's? Yep, there we go.
Half a day, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank the Port Authority of Guam for hosting the APP conference, the forum. From what I understand, it's the first here on Guam, so congratulations. And also thank you for inviting APL to be part of the panel. So a little bit about APL. We do provide U.S. flag shipping into Guam every week. Our service calls the U.S. West Coast, LA, and Oakland. Our transit time from LA is 24 days, and our transit time from Oakland is 18 days. Our ship then goes from the West Coast through Asia. We transship in Yokohama, Japan, and the cargo gets transferred over to the Guam vessels. The Guam vessels are the APL Oceania and the APL Islander. It then takes 3.5 days for it to get to Guam from Yokohama. After Guam, we go to Saipan on a fortnightly basis, and then we go to Busan, Korea, and back to Yokohama. That service is called the Guam Saipan Express. It is a U.S. flag, and it is a P1 service, which basically means it is a U.S. flag service all the way through. Next slide. All right, the different types of equipment that APL provides. We do our standard dry containers of 20 and 40 foot. And then our reefers, we also have 20 and 40 foot containers. We have our 40 foot open tops, and we have 40 foot flat racks that help you load your out of gauge cargo. And that is also how we handle break bulk. Now, I have some photos here of our APL Guam vessels that I spoke to you about earlier. And the beautiful thing about our ships is they are self-sustained. And what that basically means is we have our own ship's gear so that in the event the vessels go to port and the port's gantry cranes are not working, APL is still able to discharge our containers. An example would be recently after the typhoon, the port gantries, were down. And so we were able to use our ship's gear. It is slower, but we were able to still provide containers into Guam's supply chain. and products back on the shelves. That's about it. So this is one of our vessels that call the West Coast. And so APL has made huge investments in brand new vessels. So 7 brand new ships that we've built last year. And again, these are the ships that call the West Coast. I also like to point out that APL, we are owned by CMA CGM. They are our parent company. And what that allows, for Guam and for our region is it opens up your network. It opens up your network and it opens up your buying power where you can actually source out equipment. You can source out product from basically anywhere in the world. So this network opens up to 160 different countries. So you can source out product from Europe or Asia. And we will provide it on a P2 service, which means one of those legs will be a U.S. flag vessel. Thank you.
Thank you, Chow. Patrick.
Okay, I think I had
Yep.
I had a few slides as well, if you don't mind. Okay, I just wanted to provide this as context, just reminding us, where we all are. It's not as elegant and dramatic as the Admiral's blue marble, but it shows you the scale of and the location of where we are and all that beautiful blue ocean, that binds us together. It's quite a distance. Guam to Hawaii is farther away than Hawaii is to the U.S. mainland. You all, a lot of you flew out here, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. And then just highlighting some of the routes that Matson has through this particular lane. We have routes throughout the rest of the Pacific, but the relevant lanes are shown here. Not only into Guam, but you can see some of the sub-routes that go out to the rest of the islands, CNMI and Micronesia. This is an example of one of our ships. One of the types that we're quite proud of, and as currently 2 of these in service in the Guam routes. This one is the Matsonia. It's what we call a Conroe vessel. So if you look at the back side of the vessel, it's got a garage. And that's pretty special, as you'll see in a subsequent slide. We're talking about military, supporting the military logistics and what's happening here with, as Derek mentioned, the buildup of the infrastructure throughout the region. And so you need equipment. You certainly need containerized cargo to come through, which we do have as well, as Michelle had pointed out. But then you need to bring equipment in as well. So this is some of the military construction equipment coming in. It's going on a containerized vessel, but we find innovative ways to allow that cargo to be loaded onto a container vessel. But with our Conroes, we do have the garage in the backside, and that does allow us to roll off certain other types of vehicles. This one in particular, the picture doesn't really do it justice, but that is a very huge articulating loader. And the wheel is about 6 foot 5 inches. It's tall. It's very tall. It's taller than most people. And, that's coming into Guam. But then we're also talking about the surrounding islands of the CNMI and Micronesia. And I like this chart because it kind of helps you understand the scale of that part of these islands. You've got Guam in the middle. You've got Palau sort of in the Bay Area. And then you've got Madro, over there in Virginia and North Carolina. So it's quite a huge footprint, right? And it's a lot of tiny little dots and tiny little ports ultimately. And we go beyond that as well because of what if you're reading up on what's happening in this part of the world, you heard the Admiral talk about the first island chain of the Philippines, Okinawa, Japan, Korea, and then you've got sort of the second island chain, which is all of us here, Guam, Palau, Yap, and some parts of the rest of Micronesia. And then there's work happening in places like the Philippines, Australia, And so we're kind of keeping that in view as well, because there's going to be some needs either to get there or to get things from there. So we're keeping all of that in view. And to answer that need, this has been part of our solution, is to make investments, you know, in this region. The bigger ships, you know, they pass through, they originate from the West Coast, and they pass through and hit all their ports and then go back to the West Coast. What we've done is we've created a fleet of capable vessels. Some of them are self-propelled, most of them are barges. And you're probably wondering, well, why barges? Well, because they're the most cost-efficient, they're the right size to get into the ports, you know, that we're talking about here. They're smaller island ports, right? Smaller than Guam, for sure. And you need to be flexible and nimble enough. And you also need to be mindful of the type of cargo that you're going to be carrying for the types of projects that we've been talking about. Derek mentioned, you know, Golden Dome was a big topic of discussion in Hawaii. And as he rightly pointed out, it's a little different here in the Western Pacific, because it's about creating that redundancy, creating that added infrastructure for, you know, for the defense posturing in the region. And that includes a lot of infrastructure, right? Building up the current bases here on Guam, but then there's so much more. They're redeveloping the airfields in Tinian, right? Those were first built in the World War II. There's a project to build up the harbor, the protective breakwater project here in Guam. They're talking about spending $1 billion potentially in YAP to redevelop their airfields and port. And in Palau, probably another $500–600 million to redevelop that port. This is just an example of some of the assets that we now have currently based here in Guam and the CNMI to handle these types of project cargoes. And this is some of those barges at work. This is some work we did in Tinian. This happened to be a military, some military cargo making its way to Tinian to support the Red Horse Construction Battalion of the Air Force as they did work on clearing the airfields in Tinian. Anybody hear of Kwajalein? Can you show of hands? People have heard of Kwajalein? Some people have been, okay, good. So Kwajalein is kind of like the Diego Garcia of the Pacific that the Admiral had kind of pointed out. Doesn't quite have the same mission. It's not necessarily a supply you know, depot to help with advanced conflicts or expeditionary conflicts. It's a missile defense test range. So they shoot missiles from Vandenberg, California, out to this atoll. And there's a bunch of scientists and very smart people that work out there, and they try to intercept them, track them, shoot them down. Well, not really shoot them down, but just track them and they test all the latest technologies that I think they're ultimately going to be deployed in places like Guam. And this is Palau. This is our smaller barge that's started what we call liner service, which is a regular schedule service into Palau. As Michelle rightly pointed out, you know, Priority 1 U.S. flag service is very important for military construction projects, as it's a requirement that, you know, they prioritize the use of U.S. flag platforms. And so this is our barge making its way in as a Priority 1 service into Palau from Guam. And this is our bigger barge. This is a 15,000-ton barge, bringing in aggregate into Palau. This is also Priority 1 U.S. flag asset. It's also going to be based here in Guam. And it just recently completed a delivery of aggregate into Palau's port. And that's a nice picture of Palau's port. It's pretty small, but mighty. They do a lot of work there. This is the Navy's project now that's coming up. It's already, I think they've submitted all the bids, and it should be awarded in September. It's probably going to be a $500 million project to redevelop that little port, extend it out a couple hundred feet, and then just kind of redevelop the whole apron and pier space so that it would handle more cargo. This is a smaller barge doing some just as important work to lighter a larger bulk vessel. Again, it's aggregate. This is perfect type of work for barges. And this was in Apra Harbor. This was done earlier this year. But it doesn't just call for solutions on the ocean, on transportation. So we've actually made investments onshore as well, because once you bring the materials to the island, you've got to have a place to store it. And so we've actually leased this property actually quite a number of years ago in anticipation of the first buildup in 2012. But now things are happening, and we've redeveloped it, and it's available for sort of added value to our customers if they needed additional off-dock storage, away from the port. The port is meant to be really a vessel, focused on vessel operations. If you need longer-term storage, we're trying to find solutions for that as well. It's all part of the logistics change ultimately, so it's just another value-added sort of offer we have. And that's all I had. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So it sounds like your ability to respond to the needs of the military and say civilian expansions are pretty mature. I mean, you've got investments in land, you've got investments in vessels. How about for disasters? We've had recent disasters, we've had past disasters, all requiring unusual amounts of equipment and materials being brought in. Have there been any lessons learned or any expansions or changes in your operations or equipment that was caused by some of these events?
Yeah, absolutely. Mike Legler is here from FEMA, so I don't want to steal his thunder because I know he's going to be presenting later. But yeah, I think the one lesson learned is ocean transportation is a solid way to get materials into an area during a disaster. Obviously, air is fast, right? And there's still a need for that. But if you've been through a disaster, you understand there's different phases of the disaster. There's immediate response, where like you need food and water, shelter. And then there's kind of another phase where you move into, okay, then we can bring things in that has a different sort of timeline. Maybe some of it is more restorative work. We need building materials to provide temporary cover to housing and things like that. That can come a little bit later, and it can come as a steady flow, especially to smaller islands, because it can only digest and absorb that with a certain pace. Concrete poles, wooden poles. So there's a good balance between air freighting things in and shipping things in. Whereas, probably the initial reaction is like, let's just fly everything in because it's the fastest way to do it. And then everything shows up, but then you realize you don't need everything right away. And so I think that's where, you've got a good balance. And in terms of storage, happy to say FEMA's got plenty of storage space here. We did make our Polaris property available, but they're pretty well equipped and resourced here, so they've got plenty of storage capacity, which is it's good to know. Sorry if I stole your thunder, Mike.
You can repeat it. Anything to add, Michelle?
In regards to the typhoon, as carriers, the first reaction is, let's get in as fast as we can. But we're very, reminded of the fact that we can't just come into the port. We have to wait for the U.S. Coast Guard, right? They have to do their inspections and make sure that it's safe to dock. We appreciate the Coast Guard now more than ever, and we also appreciate the tugs and the pilots because we need them to bring our vessels in. They were down and they had to reposition, some tugs from Saipan to bring us in. And really, it's not us reacting as an island. We shouldn't react to the disaster after the fact, right? It's a lot of pre-planning. It's a lot of communication, and you can imagine how many typhoons we get here in Guam, and we should be really professional at this already. But you cannot over-communicate enough, especially in the logistics industry, just amongst the island. We're so interconnected, the network, that we heavily rely on each other. We heavily rely on the Port Authority of Guam, and they did a great job, opening the ports as soon as they could. So, that's a lot of lessons learned, and, we probably still don't have it right, all of us, but it takes a lot of communication and planning.
Yeah, that was emphasized throughout all of the previous presentations, including that of the Admiral. The Admiral talked a lot about resiliency and, improving cybersecurity and all of the vulnerabilities that we have. What are your companies doing in some of those areas?
Well, I think one of the common themes that I'm hearing, and I totally buy into this, is is the relationships and the networks that we're building. So, in a disaster, it's like, who do I work with? Who do I talk to? Who's going to do this? Who's that? Thankfully, the carriers at the port, along with the port, and our partners at Coast Guard, Guam Customs, we are in a very active group. We meet once a month as a regular group, and we bring in all the industry partners that have, a stake in the port operations. We all come together. We all know each other. And in peacetime, it's great. We just covered, certain topics that we need to cover. But certainly in times of disaster, it's really good that we're all connected already. We know how to call each other. It's easier to just pick up the phone, and just, as Michelle mentioned, communication is so important. But it's that relationship, too, that we're comfortable. We know who to talk to. We trust each other. We're all going to do the right thing. And I think that's essential.
And I find that's a little bit different here. I mean, it's a closer knit network here than, say, in Honolulu, especially between the industry and the military, because when Pasha, Young Brothers, and ourselves met at the winter conference, we weren't able to get the military to attend, but what came out of it was the lack of information maybe that we aren't getting from the military. So, an emphasis for greater communications and greater reach out. And I think that discussion or that panel maybe opened our eyes to the need for that, and so we're trying to do better with that.
And I just want to extend that. That's not only just Guam,
Yeah.
because, APL goes to Saipan, we go to Saipan. Lee's group in Saipan, Tinian, Rota. There's folks from Micronesia out here, Majuro, Pohnpei. There's also a relationship amongst the islands as well. We kind of all know each other. We know who to call if we need something, or they know who to call us if they need something. So that extends out even to the other islands.
Okay, thank you. Any further ideas or thoughts that you'd like to share with the group before I go to questions? No?
Patrick had mentioned about communications. Maybe I'd just like to highlight and actually show off to you. I live on Saipan, but the executive director for the Commonwealth Ports Authority here, Ms. Esther Adda, is there. And right behind her are 3 representatives of the 3 ports in the Sinai. I have them all on my phone. I've spoken to Albert. Albert, raise up your hand, from the Port of Rota. I've spoken to McQueen, Port of Saipan. Natasha, I just spoke to you 2 weeks ago, correct? So communications. Cargo comes in or is set to arrive. It makes the logistical chain simple. We communicate in advance. Natasha, I have some cargo coming to Tinian, etc. When is it due in, etc. This is how we're going to operate. Mission, safety, of course, and efficiency. So just like to highlight that. That was my last one, Derek. Thank you.
It's great. Thank you. Thank you. Like I said, I recognize that there's a lot of differences here where there's a closer knit network that communicates regularly and often, and are willing to share and trust in what you do. Yeah. Okay, so let me go to questions. Any questions out there for the group? Sir.
Hi, John Daly, Port of Alaska. You mentioned U.S. flag vessels several times in the priority service, so I'm not familiar. Are you beholden to the Jones Act, or is there what's the impetus to use U.S. flag vessels? And do you receive any foreign vessels?
Yeah, so Guam's, Matson is a Jones Act carrier, but the Jones Act doesn't really apply in Guam. EPL's a U.S. flag carrier. There's 2 other carriers that come in from Asia. Those are foreign flagging carriers, and they have direct service from different ports of Asia, North Asia, Southeast Asia, into Guam, and then the rest of Micronesia as well.
So to add to that, if you are shipping cargo from a U.S. port, right, into Guam, then it should be on a U.S. flag vessel. So we go through Asia. You don't have to be U.S. flag, but if you are going to be shipping anything for the military, anything that deals with construction or the projects in the base, then it would have to be in a U.S. flag.
Any other questions? Okay. If not, Jane, thank you very much. Thank you